This is Burnt Popcorn. I'm Dave Masakura,
And I am Tony Thomas.
and we here are the biggest nerds that you're ever going to meet as far as film, television, and geek pop culture goes. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself real quick, and then my co-host Tony will tell you a little bit about himself. I am sort of an aspiring writer. You know, I've studied film and also mainly screenwriting as it pertains to film and television. I'm more focusing on novels now, but I do know about the business. It's going to be one of my approaches that I'm going to take to all of my critical assessments here on the show. I used to be one of those like really artsy kind of guys that was really into like experimental film, abstract filmmaking, cinema verite, all that kind of stuff. I can appreciate the art form, but it's just really not my thing anymore. And I can appreciate it. Don't get me wrong, but I come from now sort of a more commercial approach. I am not somebody that's gonna, bash comic book. And I see my co-host laughing already. I don't hate comic book movies. Actually, I think some of them can be amazing. I think all that matters is the story. It's just most of them, they really don't have a lot story-wise. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll get to our topics.
Well, I'm glad you managed to alienate the comic book geeks so early on. I was expecting that to happen soon. My story is I've always been a fan of watching movies. I really hit that stride when I want to say I was about 11, 12 years old when my father started taking me to movie rental stores on the weekend so I could have something to do, something to watch. This was right after my parents got me a DVD player for Christmas. This was the early 2000s, so this was like maybe a year or two after they first came out. First two DVDs were The Phantom Menace and the Brendan Fraser remake of The Mummy.
Nice.
And I just wanted to gobble up film and see as much as I can. Honestly, 11-year-old being set free in, well, it was actually a movie gallery because their old movies were cheaper to rent than Blockbuster at the time. I was looking for movies with some TNA in it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Did your movie gallery have one of those tanning stations in it at that time?
This one did, yes.
Yeah, I worked in one of those.
This one actually, I think, was next door. Like you had to go through.
Was this the Hanover one?
No, this was the one in Wilkes-Barre across from the Genetti's. There was a movie gallery back there.
Oh, was that by the that train station looking thing?
Yes, where the little train station thing. It was back there with a couple other shops, a nail salon, which might be the only surviving business in that little strip. But my father would take me, and sometimes it would take me like up to half an hour to find a movie to watch because I was just going in by myself, mainly looking at what was cool. I wasn't into horror movies at the time, so I was mainly going off of box office art and actors that I liked. Or
did you really like when you were like? I picture you, and by the way, for those of you who which is most of you, I'm assuming, don't know this guy. This guy, like picture like a little 11-year-old kid walking around like a little briefcase, probably with like box office receipts, like he's like kid show business walking in there. He probably is like telling. Anyway, go right ahead. It's just a little bit about Tony Thomas.
And I would also look for movies that were rated R for nudity and sexual content.
So you were a pervert even then?
Yes, even then. And this was about a year or two before I discovered internet pornography. But anyway, I sort of discovered by renting these movies what I liked and what I didn't like. Because, I would rent 2 or 3 movies at a time, and over a weekend I'd watch them. And as I became more familiar with the internet and websites like IMDb, I was able to hone in on movies that I would like, reading various suggestions, and I try and keep track of movies I've seen. And I know to some of you out there this may be a paltry number, but I'm almost at 2,000 different films that I've seen in probably a 10-year span. And for this area, that's kind of remarkable, since for any local listeners, the selections at our former Blockbusters and movie galleries, they weren't the most diverse. So as it stands today,
By the way, to those of you listening in, you're going to learn real fast about our good friend Tony here that self-flagellation and self-congratulation are not foreign languages to Tony Thomas, so just be aware of that as we proceed.
I try and stay humble, but I mean, I love all kinds of movies. I'd say I'm a big movie lover. There's very few specific types of movies that I dislike, though what I do dislike you will know about. But I'm not coming from this from a technical aspect like my co-host here. I have dabbled here and there in screenwriting, read about filmmaking, but I would say I'm probably, from that aspect, I'm more into the artistic side of things than necessarily commercial if I ever got around to making a film or writing one. But there, going back to what you were saying about art films, I would venture that I'm probably a bigger fan of the, like your art film, your surreal film than you are. I know you have a dislike generally for David Lynch, for instance.
I wouldn't say dislike.
You have your issues.
I have some issues, but okay.
But, I'm just throwing this out here for those listening. This is not the hour to discuss rare Bulgarian films that you could only watch on Betamax. This is not that podcast.
No, we're going to be talking about films that people actually see and that they actually want to see, and we're going to talk a little bit about sometimes why that is. Why do people want to see these films and not, say, abstract Lithuanian films that are, set completely in black and white and about a clown surviving a Holocaust. So, right. I mean, that's essentially going to be our approach. And by the way, to back up what Tony was saying, when it comes to appreciating film, television, and geek culture, obviously you guys know that you don't need to be involved in any aspect whatsoever of the industry. As a matter of fact, it puts me at a disadvantage sometimes that I'm heavily into story structure like I am. And by the way, you're probably going to hear me say story structure about 1 billion times throughout our podcast. And by the way, if you want to make a drinking game,
I was just going to suggest that.
Go right ahead. And it does kind of put me at a disadvantage because I've been noticing lately, sometimes I get so caught up in analyzing the structure, it feels like, honestly, sometimes I can't even appreciate just watching a movie anymore. It's kind of maddening. So you may find that I get caught up on that. And if you do, just call me out on Twitter. And I know I'm going to get called out on a bunch of things. Tony already alluded to some of you comic book fans out there. But let me reiterate, I have nothing against superhero films. Nothing. I like a good number of them. But I'm not going to make up excuses for them when they fall flat and they have, like, the story structure of a porno. I'm not going to do that. So, well, that being said, let us get on to our first segment. This is going to be our news segment where we're going to be talking about issues in film and television that are happening right now that are going to have, I would say, a pretty big effect on the industry at large and even your viewing habits. So, Tony, what was the first subject that you wanted to talk about?
Well, the first one is actually a rumor that you have told me about.
This is coming from Latino Review.
Which they have been spot on some things and completely dead wrong on others. So, but with one like this, especially since this rumor has been talked about as something that's going to happen for a couple years now, I think that you don't have to take such a big grain of salt with it. And that rumor is that Marvel will finally get back Spider-Man.
Yeah, this is coming off of Sony's had some pretty big missteps lately. This is sort of like a topic that's going to be connected to another one that we're going to jump into. Sony's been having some issues lately. The Interview being the prime example of of where they're not making their money back. And, you remember a couple of years ago, before not Casino Royale, I'm sorry, before Skyfall came out, everybody was like, is there going to be another James Bond film? Because MGM and Sony Pictures, they were having some major issues. MGM was I believe it was filing bankruptcy at the time. And people weren't sure if there was going to be another Bond film. They kept saying, yes, of course there's going to be another Bond film. We just have to get our finances straightened out. And of course they did, but it seems like we're going back into the same kind of hole now. And there's this issue right now where Sony is really looking into trying to get back a lot of its profits. The writing is on the wall already. Disney/Marvel now has been pretty adamant lately about getting Spider-Man back. And I think they don't have a choice. Spider-Man is probably the biggest name that Marvel has. You could attest to that, Tony.
I would agree. I would say that as a single superhero, Spider-Man is their greatest character. And there are, I'd say as of right now, especially since the 1980s, the X-Men has been their biggest franchise in terms of comic books. Ever since X-Men went through their revival in the 80s. But with X-Men, a lot of the characters need each other else in order to get along or be interesting. Like Magneto, he's great, but he's not as compelling if he doesn't have Professor X to run up against. Cyclops, great guy, but not as interesting if you don't get into the whole triangle with him, Logan, and Jean Grey. But as a standalone character, Spider-Man is their number one guy. He's the Batman of the Marvel universe, and partly that has to do with, I would argue, Spider-Man has a great villain gallery. He has.
Yeah, they do have like a badass rogues gallery.
Yes, I didn't want to use rogues gallery because of Batman, which is why I stopped myself. But I mean, if you think about it, who does Iron Man really have notable other than the Mandarin?
Yeah, Spider-Man's the biggest name.
You could do a top 50 list of compelling Spider-Man villains, and he's a character that needs to come back because the Spider-Man films that Sony put out over the past 12 years or so, they have not always been the greatest.
Yeah, I mean, that's why there's even talk right now where if this does happen, and that's a big if, obviously, because it's a lot of money.
A lot of money involved.
I can't wait to see the numbers of what they're going to pay for Spider-Man. But the other rumor in that goes is that if Disney Marvel does acquire Spider-Man, they're going to completely reboot it and recast it. And that obviously has some Andrew Garfield fans livid about the subject because the guy, he's a good Spider-Man.
He is, and he's my favorite. I mean, there's only two options, but I prefer him immensely to Tobey Maguire. And in recent years, I've come to realize there's a lot of issues with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films. I dislike Kirsten Dunst. She's a bad Mary Jane.
Why is that in particular?
I mean, I don't really care for Kirsten Dunst, so casting-wise...
Is that a sexual thing? What is that?
Do I find her not... Are you asking
what is it? What is it about her that you're not digging?
I just don't like her as an actress. I don't find her compelling.
I asked that because I saw a glimmer in your eye, and it felt like a dirty sexual kind of glimmer thing going on, and I don't know. I just wasn't picking up.
Okay, she's not the woman that I picture Mary Jane to be in my head. Mm-hmm. I mean,
it is a head thing.
It is a head thing, and with Spider-Man 3 is just garbage.
Oh, yeah, no, Spider-Man 3.
Even Sam Raimi came out, I want to say he admitted to on the Nerdist, but I could be wrong, but a couple months ago, recently he admitted it's not a good film, and I'm sorry, It's not. And
pornos have better plots than Spider-Man 3.
Not even that, but there are just so many issues with it. The dancing, the lackluster use of villains in it. And weirdly enough, there are some very adamant and vocal defenders of that film.
Yeah, believe me, I've ran into a couple two-tree of them, as we say here in northeastern Pennsylvania.
It's weird. They just like the movie, and you like what you like, but it's odd to like that film. And I think the Sony reboot of Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, and that did rile the Tobey Maguire Peter Parker fans, so you already have that group mad about that recasting. I thought they did a decent job with the first film. It's not a perfect film, but there is a really good film hiding in there in parts. I mean, they did not need to do another origin story in that, and I don't think they need to do an origin story when they bring Spider-Man back.
I don't know. I mean, maybe not now.
No,
because it's been done 2 times already.
Right.
But I wasn't opposed to the origin story. I actually love origin stories, and I think that the best comic book movies have always been traditionally the origin story, because that's when you see like the real human elements. Like they're still like human, like you and I, kind of, for the most part, in that origin. It's about their transformation into something greater, and you see really a lot of character. The most character change always occurs in these origin stories. So, again, from a story structure perspective, I always have preferred them. But I mean, I get it now with Spider-Man. This is going to be the 3rd origin story,
right? And in the past, too, it's been the same. It's always the same origin story. I really haven't seen them go with any of the alternative ones out there. Peter gets bit by a radioactive spider. I don't see them really finding a compelling or interesting way of doing that the 3rd time around. I mean, granted, I think you need to do some kind of basic origin in there, but I don't think you need to take the first half hour of the film like the first Amazing Spider-Man did with Andrew Garfield. The first 30 to 40 minutes of that is drawn out origin story. I don't think they need to go that far. Maybe 10, 15 minutes to set it up. I don't think they need to take almost a third of the film.
This is a really interesting quandary, though. That if Marvel Disney... Is that what you would call it? Disney Marvel at this point?
I think it's Disney Marvel.
Disney Marvel. I mean, that's the quandary that they're going to find themselves in. Because the rumor, of course, is that if they do go through with the acquisition, Spider-Man is suddenly going to show up in, I think they're saying, Infinity War Part 1.
Right. They originally wanted him for the 3rd Captain America movie, which is supposed to, according to rumors, set off the Civil War storyline, which Spider-Man, in the comic book run of that, plays a very important role. But without him, I guess they have to write around that for that. But that's where they originally wanted him to come into their universe. And if they throw him in the Infinity War, you have to do they give him his standalone film after that, you think?
You know what? I think it would behoove them at this point to keep Andrew Garfield. Because
I agree.
If you do, you could just assume that you assume the origin story has occurred, but it's really going to come down to, do they want to make bank off of it? Because they're probably going to say, nah, maybe we didn't agree with the way that they did the origin story, so we're going to tell our version now. That's always a possibility, because again, but again, I agree with you. If they do that, they're going to have to do something that's radically different from what's been on the screen already, because this is going to be number 3.
Right, and in such a short time span, I mean, the reason why I think the Christopher Nolan reboot of Batman works and Batman Begins, and you spend a good chunk of that movie in the origin story. I want to say it's almost the first hour or so, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But you have such a big time span between Batman films, and Nolan went in such a different direction with his vision of Batman, where I think it's totally appropriate to have almost that entire movie, be the origin story for Batman.
Yeah, I mean, you went into that knowing that this was going to just be totally different
Right.
from what you've seen, and that really brought all the new life to it. And if Disney Marvel decides to maybe go in a direction like that, okay, but...
And I think that's where they're going to go with the next, I guess it's the third or fourth phase now in their vision, because the Civil War story is very dark. You have Captain America versus Iron Man. It's a battle of ideology, and for fans who have read it, some very big names get killed in that storyline. And spoilers? Do you want me to spoil the one big death, or should we just let those who know it, and if you want to look it up,
well,
just wiki
spoiler
it?
alert, there's going to be a major spoiler bomb dropped in about 2 seconds. So if you're not familiar with the comic book storyline, you could maybe stop now, but go right ahead. I mean,
well, in that storyline, and forgive me, comic book fans, if I get the chronology right, but I'm almost positive this happens at some point in the Civil War storyline, but Captain America is assassinated in that storyline. And, okay, he does come back eventually because comic books are soap operas for boys. And I'm a fan, but, I mean, there's so many...
And I'm the one that's going to take shit from the Cheeto Brigade?
Well, let me just explain that. I mean, come on. So many characters get rewritten. Marvel just recently announced they're blowing up their timeline. And DC went through several changes in their timeline where the older stories aren't really factoring into the current stories. I mean, everything changes. It's very fluid, kind of like a soap opera. But Captain America is killed in it. So I wonder if at some point they kill off the Chris Evans Captain America. And I wonder, this is just my speculation here, they kill him off, which on a business side, that frees him from his Marvel contract if he does not want to appear in any other Marvel films. And, for example, Robert Downey Jr. was very hesitant at coming back for more of these movies.
I was just about to say, I mean, if they're thinking about, like, blowing up the storyline and all that, I mean, that does give them, like,
right.
wiggle room to get out of their contracts. Because if Robert Downey's done with Iron Man and... lately he's been saying he doesn't want to do, like, standalones,
mm-hmm.
and next thing you know, he's going to be like, I'm kind of done with, like, the Iron Man gig.
Right. They have ways to get out of these characters, and, recently in the comic books, they had Falcon, if I'm not mistaken, assume the identity of Captain America. That was the big controversy, or the Black Captain America. But seeing that they've introduced Falcon into this Marvel universe, I can see them going that direction, carrying on a new Captain America with a different guy playing him. But, what they're going to run into is these guys can't play these characters forever. So they are going to have, that's why they're introducing, like, Black Panther, Ms. Marvel, and all these other characters. So you have different actors lead these on because, let's face it, these are real people. Not all of them want to play the same damn character for 20, 30 years. But I think if they can pull this off, this will be huge, and will be very exciting since Spider-Man is one of my favorite Marvel characters.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think Spider-Man, in many ways, and don't hate me for saying this, but I think one of the issues that I've been having with, there's just something I know everybody loves the Avengers, and it was by all means a great movie, but there was always this nagging little feeling in the back of my mind, and I kept
because you're
saying
wondering where the
missing. No, something, and it finally came around. Something was missing, and that something was Spider-Man.
Right, and I loved, by and large, I'm a big fan of the Marvel films, but
Spider-Man is the most iconic character of the Marvel universe.
And I have to say...
He has the same colors as the Marvel logo, red.
And I have to say, I've been sitting there in, like, the Avengers film, I'm like, I really wish Spider-Man was here.
And I think that's what a lot of people have been maybe even afraid to say, some of you purists out there, but that's the dirty little secret.
Especially because Spider-Man was a member of the early Avengers teams.
Wasn't he the leader? if I remember correctly.
For a time, I want to say in the one Amazing Spider-Man, he's offered membership to the Avengers, but he turns it down initially, but he does come around and eventually join them. But, I mean, you got to get him back.
Yeah, that's obviously something that's going to happen. And as they say in, the comic book world, to be continued. All right, so we're going to move on to our next subject here. Right now, what's going on in the news, and this is similar to the conversation that we were having about Sony getting ready to sell Spider-Man to possibly Disney Marvel. That's coming along from what's been going on lately with the interview. And this is an interesting thing that my man Tony over here knows a lot about. He's been following the story pretty closely. Tony, why don't you tell us what you found out about the interview?
Okay, well, there was a Forbes article that came out a little less than a month ago, roughly late December, on how much money the interview made. And the numbers are in, and the interview made roughly, as of the end of December, $15 million. Now, that's just based off of internet rentals and a very small number of theatrical releases. Now, how much money do you think it cost to make the interview?
Wasn't it like...
It was leaked in the Sony email, so we know the exact number.
Well,
Do you want to venture a guess?
No, what was the... exact...
$44 million is how much the movie cost. So $15 million on digital release, not that bad considering there was the stigma of North Korean hackers surrounding that. Do you think it could have made more money if it had a traditional theatrical release? Now, the controversy's still there, but they didn't pull it from theaters.
Here's the thing, though. Before the controversy erupted, I don't remember anybody talking about the movie.
There was some buzz, but honestly, I think it would have been a definite box office bomb without the hacking controversy.
I really feel like that controversy, it gave it its best shot. I think if the movie, if the controversy happened and it had a wide release, okay, it would probably make a ton of money. But let's just think for a moment. Without the controversy and with a wide release, I don't think that it would have done necessarily that much money to begin with.
I agree. I think you're looking traditional release, no controversy, throughout its whole run, maybe $5 million tops. And that's me being generous on that. I think it would have gone down.
Is that what it made without the wide release? What was?
Well, I'm saying is if it was released in theaters, no controversy, had a traditional theatrical release, I think $5 million tops, and that's me being generous. Now, with the number being broken down, the rental was $6, and some analysts think that Sony charged a little bit too much money to rent that, and I would agree. $6 is a lot to rent a digital movie that you're watching on a small screen.
That's like old school Blockbuster prices.
Yeah. I mean, maybe $4, $5 even, you would have seen some more money. And the math comes down to roughly 2.5 million people renting this movie. Now, the other issue with the controversy is you don't know how many people pirated this movie because they didn't know if they were going to actually be able to see this movie. And I'm sure some people were skeptical of paying the $6. Maybe they just didn't want to pay the $6. But financially, maybe they could have done a little bit better had they chose not to pull the movie in the wake of the threats. But, I mean, maybe you could have done a little bit better than $15 million. But by no means, I don't envision any scenario where they are going to come close in the theatrical run to recouping that $44 million.
Oh no! I don't think they would have broke $40 million.
No.
If there was no controversy and it had a wide release. No, I don't, because there was no buzz. If
all the people were saying, here's this weird little movie where Seth Rogen and James Franco go off to assassinate the dictator of North Korea.
Yeah.
And it's a quirky idea, it's a weird idea, but that kind of premise I don't think would have brought out a big audience.
No.
And the other thing that you're seeing right now, and I've been seeing this, I don't know if you really have, is there's a lot of backlash against the very idea of making this movie. A lot of people have said that it's racist, it's culturally insensitive, especially to film a movie.
You had some major news broadcasters on some of the news talk shows, you know, be it Morning Joe, CNN. They actually had, I believe it was Mika Brzezinski from Morning Joe. She actually posited that the film should not have been made in the first place because of its aggressive. I'm trying to remember the exact wording that she used. Provocative. The word that you kept hearing about the film was that it was too provocative, and that it shouldn't have been made in the first place. I don't agree with that at all. I don't imagine that you.
No,
as well.
Not at all. I'm not going to sit here and say I think any provocative idea should be made. It's going to be how it gets made. That's what's going to determine whether or not it was a good venture or it was a good movie. But I don't think we should be afraid of exploring provocative ideas.
I thought that was the whole point of great storytelling, and it doesn't matter if it's comedy. I mean, if you want to talk about comedy, I mean, at some point, we could do a whole episode about what Bill Maher and Bill Burr were talking about on Real Time this week. Bill Maher was talking about the state of comedy, and Bill Maher has brought up that political correctness is killing comedy.
And I agree. And this is coming from two fairly liberal guys.
There's no rabid right wingers, before this microphone here. No stretch of the imagination. We're not people that take great glee in making fun of minorities and stuff like that. We're not those type of people. But and there's the but. It's comedy.
Right.
And I'm not for any kind of censorship, let alone with comedy.
And George Carlin said it great when he was talking about rape jokes. And I know this is a little off topic, but at heart, the issue here is making
off topic.
The issue here is making jokes of things that some people think should not be joked about. Like one comment that I see coming up frequently in criticism of the interview is, you're making this comedy, but hey guys, it's in poor taste because North Korean citizens are being brutalized. It's not funny to make fun of the North Korean government and North Korean culture in general. That's what I've been seeing as one of the main topics of why this movie is in poor taste.
Yeah, Margaret Cho even came out saying, like she just took a ton of shit for what she did at the Golden Globes, where she dressed up like the North Korean cultural minister or something like that. And you had all these people jump on her and say that it was racist what she was doing. She is Korean. If anybody has the right to criticize the North Korean government, and especially what it does to its people, it's her. She should have the full right to criticize them. Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, with Margaret Cho, I mean, she, of all people, and she came out and said this, she has every right to criticize them because she is Korean. I mean, why wouldn't we want to criticize these people? What reason do we have not to criticize them? I mean, the whole point is to use comedy as like a form of rebellion.
Right, and by and large, that is what comedy, especially satire, has been. It's been a means to be subversive to whatever the mainstream established construction is that you're going against. And going back to George Carlin, in his rape joke bit, he talks about what makes a good joke from a bad joke is the exaggeration. And that's why some rape jokes are very funny and very and actually not very offensive when you actually think about them, such as his famous Porky Pig raping Elmer Fudd. It's an absurd situation. It's not enforcing rape stereotypes. It's not enforcing rape culture. Now, there's a difference between that and a very tasteless frat boy kind of joke about, like, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but the kind of jokes I'm talking about, the kind that would play very well in a seedy college frat house.
Well, the reason why we're bringing this up is because there's going to be a very big move, mainly by Sony. Possibly. Sony is one of the studios that's being mentioned right now. There's an article out on Deadline Hollywood where they're speculating that Alibaba Pictures, it's a Chinese-owned company, owned by James Ma. James Ma is like this, he's like the Howard Hughes of like China right now. He's huge, immensely powerful film mogul from China. And the rumor mill is going crazy because Alibaba Pictures, Chinese, it's a Chinese e-retail giant essentially, is thinking about buying one of the American studios, and the studios that have been mentioned by Deadline have been Sony Pictures, Paramount, MGM, and Lionsgate as being the potential targets for an acquisition. Now, this would mean that a Chinese company is buying, an American company essentially. Now, I know Sony Pictures is owned by Sony proper, which is a Japanese company. But the thing is here, a lot of people are wondering, with that acquisition, does that mean that an American company is going to be subject to Chinese censorship? And as of right now, American companies, if they are going to screen any kind of film in China, it has to go through a process where the film is going to be screened, and its cultural ministry is going to look for any kind of content that is deemed offensive or subversive. We were talking about earlier about Iron Man 3 as being one of the first major examples of this. Tony, if you want to elaborate on that.
Right, and that's something that you kind of saw with the third Iron Man movie, this sort of like almost tiptoeing as not to offend the Chinese film market. I'm sure by now everybody has seen Iron Man 3. In case you haven't, stop fucking listening. And the big reveal in Iron Man 3 is that the Mandarin, who is Tony Stark's arch nemesis,
one of the greatest villains in comic books,
played very well by Ben Kingsley in that movie.
Amazingly well.
And when they show you him in the first trailer, when he's talking, against that backdrop, and you hear, I am a teacher. It was
amazing.
I
very
wanted
well to see that movie because It's such an awesome actor playing such an awesome role.
And then you find out in the last third of the movie that he's just some drunk actor, and he's not the Mandarin. And
it was I couldn't tell you how fucking pissed I was.
I don't know if I was.
Oh no! Here's a quick
little
story about Tony Thomas right here. Let's tell the truth here.
No, wait.
I remember this quite well. I remember after seeing Iron Man 3, we saw this film separately, and you're going to learn about the Tony Thomas rule right now, people. It's time. You need to know this about Tony Thomas. I asked him. I remember texting him. So, what do you think about Iron Man 3? And I remembered he saw it maybe a day or two before. And when Tony Thomas spends money on a movie theater, his opinions. If you want to get a true opinion from Tony Thomas about a film, you have to wait about a week or two after he's spent money on it, because he is going to force himself to like it because of the ticket price that he purchased. So I don't know, and this was where this rule really came to light, because I knew in the bottom of my heart, there's no way he could have liked that, and there's no way he was going to defend it, because it was ridiculous. It was you're taking potentially one of the most cool film portrayals of a comic book villain, and it was awesome. I mean, it could have been up there with the Joker.
Agreed.
I mean, you're tying like an awesome character, an awesome actor with a very important theme like terrorism. I mean, it just equals like an iconic portrayal on film of a villain. And to do that, I mean, it totally destroyed the plot.
Right, and what I was going to say was, I don't know if I was more pissed than disappointed when that reveal came across our screens, and I have to speculate that perhaps the Mandarin being potentially viewed as a throwback to 1960s anti-Asian racism, that reveal, appeasing the Chinese film market. I have to wonder if that was what was running through the studio heads when that decision was made. And I've seen some people online defend the decision as, well, maybe he really is the Mandarin and this is just the Mandarin fooling everybody. Maybe, but until that happens, I'm going to take it as what we saw in the film.
That's a bit of a stretch.
And in the third Iron Man, there's also scenes that were filmed for the Chinese market that do not appear in the American film. So essentially, there's a second cut of the movie that existed solely for Chinese audiences. And for a film's creativity to be, marketed in such a way that it's only going to play well for a certain audience, I think that's very troubling, especially if we're going to get down to decisions being made about movies being made where they're not getting made because of political decisions.
Yeah, and that's something obviously that the film industry now is going to be confronted with, largely because of the acquisitions that may or may not take place with Chinese film companies coming in and looking for a piece of the pie, because Americans are always trying to expand the market. And try to get Chinese money, and now it's a reciprocal thing now, where the Chinese are looking heavily into investing into American film studios, and obviously you're going to have more or less some right-wing commentators say this is the way that the Chinese are finally going to begin censoring Americans by buying our film companies, and this debate is going to continue. So stay tuned because this is obviously something that isn't going away, that we're going to be confronting in this grand era of globalization. So that's pretty much it as far as the film news goes. We're going to move on now to television, and
probably the big one that a lot of people are excited for a new show is Better Call Saul, which is premiering in February. I don't recall the exact date. I want to say early February. And already it's getting some buzz. Stephen Marsh of Esquire magazine gave it a review. He's seen the first couple episodes, and of course he has a very provocative statement in his review. And,
oh, does he? I didn't read this.
Yes. Now, we're both very big fans of Breaking Bad, and what he says in his review is, quote, "I'll just say it, the first very few episodes that I saw are better than Breaking Bad. They are smarter, they are sharper. I have never seen a prequel handled so cleverly." So, granted we haven't seen it, but that's knowing the two of us here, knowing how great Breaking Bad is, that's a pretty big statement to throw out there.
It's huge. I'm not gonna lie. I'm blown away by that statement, because I was expecting some like dipshit to talk about like, oh, it's like a piece of shit. It'll never amount to Breaking Bad or something.
Where's Walter?
Where's Walt?
How come they're not saying bitch?
But I'm not gonna lie. When I heard the news break that Walt and Jesse were not going to be featured
in the first season.
I'm like, all right, this is probably going to be great. Mm-hmm. I knew right then and there that Vince Gilligan was serious, because he knows that this show has to be able to stand on its own two feet. And it's going to be its own thing. And that was the big signal that was sent to me, that this thing was going to be had a real shot at being something great, because he's shooting for greatness.
Agreed. And you can't have the show fall back on Walter and Jesse being the savior of the show. The show needs to stand on its own. Odenkirk needs to be the one driving the show. The other supporting characters, I don't know if they ruled out Mike for the first season.
He's in it.
Right, he's in the first season.
Yeah.
Okay, so they didn't rule him. So you do have.
He's going to be in the first episode, I believe.
Right, so you do have a familiar face returning, but if the show is going to last on its own, it's got to be able to do so with Saul and his merry band of pranksters. I
really think that Bob Odenkirk is totally up to having the film stand on it. I'm sorry, the show stand on its own,
right.
Because quite frankly, if you think about it, when Bryan Cranston came into Breaking Bad, he was looked upon as like a comedian.
Right.
He was coming from Malcolm in the Middle.
Right. And, a lot of people knew him from Seinfeld as the dentist.
And it's just, at this point, some people, I really have a good feeling about this because both of these guys are coming from a comedic tradition. And we already saw what Bob Odenkirk could do on Breaking Bad with Saul. I mean, Saul is, I don't know. Everybody loves Walt and Jesse, but
and the one thing with
Saul, I think, is in many ways just as much of a compelling character as Walter White.
And Saul is the only major character in that series that doesn't lie about who he is. He tells you from the get-go how he is. You know his character. Walter spends that entire show trying to juggle these two personas. Jesse, even, he's very unsure of his own identity, and you could go down the line that a lot of the major characters on that show, they're all pretending to be someone else. Saul never does that.
Well, I take a little different perspective. Saul Goodman isn't the guy's real name. I believe it's like Jimmy McGill or something like that. And he says that right up front. And I think he says something like, "Oh, I just picked a Jewish name because everybody would assume that a Jew is better than a Mick, than at being a lawyer." He used that language. That's not my language. But and he's able to balance that dual persona. I think in many ways he was like a mentor character in a way to Walt and Jesse, because this is a guy who has already mastered the dual persona. He lives it, and I think we're going to see how that almost like a similar origin story, because I really feel like Better Call Saul is going to begin where Saul's character left with Breaking Bad. Not literally, but if you remember, the final scene between Walt and Saul in Breaking Bad was Walt. They were held up in that little protective identity service or erase your identity service, and Walt asked Saul, "What is he going to do now?" And Saul said something like, "I don't know, probably going to send me to someplace like Nebraska and just hope I don't end up as like a fry cook." I really think we might see, and it'd be funny, I think, as like a writer, if they began with Jimmy McGill, the fry cook.
Yes,
and he becomes a lawyer through one of those like night school kind of like shitty programs, like one of those like almost like, is it really a law degree
right.
he has or not?
Online law school.
Yeah, I think if they go down that route, there's going to be a smile in my eye. I really like it if they because that just fits him, I think.
Agreed. And the other big show that probably has even more buzz than that, I think once this show ends, everybody's already salivating for the next season. Game of Thrones comes back April 12th.
Yeah.
And on the heels of HBO's decision to launch HBO as a standalone feature where you do not need cable in order to access it, which is huge in its own right, and that is worthy of its own discussion at some point. But Game of Thrones is coming back season 5. You recently finished up the series. I'm going to rewatch some big episodes in order to gear up for season 5. How excited are you for?
Well, Game of Thrones, I admit this is something that I came late to. A lot of people came late to Breaking Bad. I was sort of a big Breaking Bad fan, but this is something I'll admit to coming late to.
About 4 seasons late.
Yeah, I really wanted to watch Game of Thrones. This wasn't something that I just brushed off. It was something I just never had the opportunity to watch. Nobody around me really wanted to watch Game of Thrones. I was the only one who did. And, I finally got the chance now, thanks to Tony. He gave me the first 3 seasons?
First 3 seasons.
First 3 seasons on DVD.
I think 4 is coming out very soon on DVD and Blu-ray.
And I already watched that on HBO Go. And I think I watched the entire show in about...
I think less than a month.
Less than 2 weeks, actually. I mean, I had just graduated college, so I had nothing better to do, and I plowed through it. And I'll tell you, the writing, of course, is just phenomenal. The characters are fantastic. It breaks my heart to see some of them go.
Right.
But that's the show, and
yes.
You go into it knowing that. And
it's a very good show for learning how to let things go.
The show's deeply about mortality,
right.
And it doesn't pull any punches. And ironically enough, I went into Game of Thrones knowing full well what it was, because the first season was pretty much spoiled for me back in 2004 when my English teacher, he saw me reading Lord of the Rings one day, and he's like, that's pussy shit. You want a real good epic fantasy? Read this. And he was talking about Game of Thrones. He says, it's the only show where they kill the main character off in the like right in the middle of it. And I'm like, what? It was like this amazing concept. And it intrigued me. But of course, at that time, I was like a dumb little shit who was like terrified of like big novels. I wasn't really a reader back then. I am now, but... I never got to reading it, but I always remembered that concept of killing off the main character, and I never forgot that, because it was, as somebody who liked writing, that was like a really intriguing concept to me.
And what drew me to it is just the scope of the world. It's very real. It's very organic. They do an amazing job at making everything seem so connected. Especially on the scope of a television show. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is something that you see all the time in movies, but for a television show to be so grand, it's quite remarkable. And I'm excited for season 5. We're going to some very interesting places.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, I have not read the books. I read the first book in high school. I did not keep up reading the books, and I know we're going to get the emails about I'll read the fucking books. Well, you know what? I'm a fan of the show. I will get to the books. But since I'm so invested in the show, I'm at the point where I want to see it unfold on the screen first before I see it happen in the book. I'm just much more invested right now in seeing the actual depiction and, take that.
That's going to be it for this episode.
Across the country in previews. There's, at least 2 Avengers trailers out right now.
And I'm not going to lie, most of the episode is going to be dedicated to the Star Wars The Force Awakens trailer.
Right. Probably spending about an hour talking about something that's 2 minutes long.
And you know what? Don't listen to him, because this is so very important. Like, from a filmmaking perspective, and you're going to hear me drink every time I say this phrase. Every second counts that you put in a trailer, especially... One could argue that this is the most important trailer in a very, very long time in film history. It just is. And every second matters. Not to say that I'm going to take a massive shit on it, but I'm not going to be one of those little fanboys that's going to praise it no matter what. I have some major concerns about this trailer. Tony is probably going to defend it to the death, I'm sure.
I'm just pointing out here that you are one of the very few people out there who's taking such a strong stance against the rolling droid.
The ball droid. The ball droid, Tony. The ball droid. And you'll find out why that is, because there's a methodology to this madness, and it's a major concern.
Fall in love with that droid. If you do, you will never live it down.
I reserve the right to change my mind. I may be very wrong about that ball droid.
Right, and there's also the strong possibility that I end up hating the movie and he ends up loving it, which
would be poetic justice.
Which I think is what's going to happen. So we have that coming up. We have some other major film trailers. I'm sure some major film news will be popping up. And we're also going to get to some other larger topics that we just couldn't fit in here today. We're going to talk about the Oscars, which are coming up in less than a month.
Are they the whitest Oscars ever? We'll look into that.
I would fancy to say the ones from the 30s and 40s probably are a whole lot wider. But we will carry that on at a later date.
All right, folks. Thank you for joining us, and tune in next week to another episode of Burnt Popcorn.